Last week there were a few areas in the fundamentals of cost management that I wanted you to spend a little bit of extra time focusing on as you were dissecting the chapter. One of those areas were the cost of quality areas that were reviewed in Chapter 10. Now, if you were taking a look at the cost of quality section of that chapter, you'll notice that it is basically categorized into two main areas. It is conformance costs and non-conformance costs. So when we're dealing with conformance costs, we're basically ensuring that the quality of the goods that we're producing or the services that we're providing do conform to the company's expectations. So we usually categorize these into two broad categories. One is prevention costs. And the other one is our appraisal costs. Sometimes we will hear these called detection costs. So prevention costs are things like inspecting our raw materials or inspecting our equipment that is producing our material or our goods, training our staff to ensure our staff, our manufacturers, our assembly line, making sure that they do have the appropriate training to make sure that they understand how we want our items to be produced. Appraisal costs are those items that happen at the end once it's been produced to ensure that it does coincide with what our expectations are within the company. So things like testing a sample of the goods that come off the line to ensure that they maintain quality, and also taking a look and seeing if there's any type of taking those goods and field testing them to ensure that they are conforming with what we would expect. Now, non-conformance costs are costs that we would incur in the event that perhaps there was some type of deviation from quality. Typically, non-conformance costs most likely are going to happen if you aren't spending the money to money on these conformance costs or these conformance activities. So if you're not taking the time to train and inspect your equipment and inspect the materials that are going into making your product, and you're not taking time to sample goods that are coming off the line, then you're probably going to have to spend some money as a company on these non-conformance costs. And there are two broad categories here. One is internal failure costs, and the other one is external failure costs. So this is when the good has already come off the line, and this isn't us testing. It isn't us. This isn't us training, and it isn't us testing to see if they have quality. This is the cost that we incur when we find out that they are not up to quality. So when you think of internal failure costs, the main thing that you're going to want to keep in mind or can keep in the back of your head that these are costs that we incur when we find out that the good that was produced does not conform prior to delivery to the customer. So internal is before we deliver to the customer, this is the cost that we incur fixing it before we actually deliver it to the customer. If it makes it to the customer and then we have to spend some money on fixing our errors, these are considered external failure costs. So internal is pre-delivery, external is post-delivery. The other area that I really wanted you to take some time to review is for cost hierarchies. So there are four broad categories for cost hierarchies. There is unit level. There is batch level. product level, and also capacity level. So when we're talking about these cost hierarchies, we can kind of take a look at each of our costs within the manufacturing plant and determine, is this cost based on a per unit basis? Is this per batch basis? Is this just for the individual product? Remember, product is very different from unit. Product as in, for example, if you think about a manufacturer, let's say like Nissan, the individual car that they're producing would be the unit, but if it is a certain model of car, that would be product. So if we were talking about Nissan Versas, this would be the product. The individual car itself would be unit. And then capacity level, which has to do with within that relevant range that we started learning about as well. So when we think about unit level costs, we're thinking about things along the lines of, say, the direct wages or our direct materials. Perhaps we're talking about the items that are going exactly into that product. Now, batch level is all the costs that we're incurring to process a particular batch. So perhaps something like a setup process, if we've just set up our machinery to go ahead and process a certain batch. Product level is things that have to do with the individual product itself, not the unit. So for example, if we're doing special advertising for a certain product line, I guess it might help us to think of this as product line. If we're doing some type of advertisement for that product line, that would be a product-related cost. And then capacity, a big one we usually like to think about is rent. As long as we are within a relevant range, then that would fall into that capacity area. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tie this up here. Those are just a few extra areas that I just wanted to touch upon, but I want you guys to make sure that you know these different areas for our upcoming exam.